Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuhu, and very good morning. My name is Sak Ali Muhammad, and I'm looking forward to taking with this part, which is identifies the possible entities with their respective attributes. So first of all, I'm going to define an entity and attribute. So number one, entity type is a group of objects with the same properties which are identified by the enterprise as having an independent existence. So for example, like we can see here, organizer, volunteer, project study, and feedback. So number two, attributes is a property of an entity or a relationship type. Like we have more example about here. We have organizer primary key, we have organizer name, gender. So on here also we have the attributes of the volunteer. We have volunteer primary key, volunteer name, gender, project foreign key, and so on. And here also we look here, we have ER diagram. So number one, here we have organizer. So can we see here organizer to project? Organizer to project is a one to many, because one project can have one and only one organizer at a time. And also here project to project study is a one to one, because project must be either approved or completion at a time. If you look here, if you look at this one, which is project to volunteer, is a many to one. The reason why, because volunteer can have as many projects at a time. So for the last one, we have volunteer to feedback is a one to one, because we can have only one feedback in any project. And here also we have data dictionary. We have number one, organizer table. So organizer table, can we look here, we have attributes, data type, size, and description. The attribute, we have organizer primary key. The data of the attribute, we have char. The size is 4. The description, we have organizer ID ranging from 001 to 0010, and so on. So number two, also here we have attribute organizer name, and the data type of the attribute we have is char, and the maximum of the maximum size of the attribute in this table we have is 20, and so on. So here also we can look here, we have number two, project table. Project table, we have attributes, data type, size, and description. So attribute, like we have project primary key, project title, limit, project date and venue, and organizer foreign key. So the data type, we have char, and number two, so we have char, small int, data, char, and char. So the maximum size of this attribute we have is 50, and the description also we have the number one description of the project ID. We have project ID ranging from the 001 to P010, and so on. So we can move here. For number three, we have project study table. We have attribute, data type, size, and description. So we have attribute study, we have ID primary key and char. The size is 4 we have, and the description study number ranging from S001 to S010. So the maximum size of the attribute in this table we have 4, and we have 3 different sizes, 4, 2, and 1. Yeah, we have here also attributes, approve it, volunteer required, we have completion and project foreign key, and so on. So for number four, we have volunteer table. The attribute of the volunteer table, we have volunteer primary key, volunteer name, gender, and project foreign key. So the data type of the attribute we have char and all of them char in this table. So the size we have 4, 31, 4. So we can look here. The maximum size of the attribute we have is 30, and so on. So can we move to the last one? Last one we have feedback table. Feedback table, we can look here: attributes, data type, size, and description. So attribute we have feedback, primary key, significance, adkins, we have impact, volunteer ID. So data type we have char and a small int. So the size, maximum size we have 4, and the another one we have 2. So the description we have here: feedback ID ranging from F001 to F015. So the second description we have rating of significance of the tasks from 1 to 10, bad to good. Yeah. So the third one we have rating of time allocated from 0 to 10, bad to good. So, and the fourth one we have rating of the impact of the project to the student of the school from 1 to 10, bad to good. And the last one we have volunteer ID, and so on. And thank you so much. That is all from me. And thank you so much.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Taha and I'll be presenting about our SQL script. So firstly, we were required to insert drop table statements into our script. So these are our drop statements. So second of all is to create and insert into our tables. So for our organizer table, the attributes listed are over here, and organizer ID is our primary key. The result of creating and inserting into the table is presented right here. For table project, our primary key is project ID, and the constraints that we used here is that we have a foreign key, which is organizer ID from the previous table, and on delete cascade so that it deletes itself once it's referred to. Constraint check limit. This is to restrict the limit of the number of volunteers between 1 and 4. And these are our insert statements. So these are 10 different insert statements. This is the result. So for our volunteer table, the primary key is the volunteer ID, and our constraint is the foreign key, which is project ID from the previous table. References project on delete cascade, again to delete once it's referred to. The reason why we use project ID is because the volunteers would be registering for the projects. So these are 15 different insert statements. The result is presented over here. Alright, for our project status table, which the primary key is status ID, and our first constraint is the foreign key, which is project ID, since the project status is an extension to the project table. And for this check completion, it's a measure is a rating system between 1 and 10, 1 being incomplete and 10 being complete. This is our result. Alright, so for our feedback table, our create table feedback, our primary key is the feedback ID, and we have 4 different constraints. One is for the foreign key, which is volunteer ID, because only the volunteers will be giving the feedback. And next we have constraints which is for our rating system. So our first constraint is to check the significance of the project between 1 and 10, 1 being poor and 10 being good. And the same applies for check adequacy and check impact. These are insert statements. These are 15 different statements to be inserted into the table. This is the result.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Muhammad Asdaq and my matric number is 1922779. And for our group project today, I'll be explaining the task 3, which is the SQL query. So our first query is on how to update the approved status in the project status table. So for example, we are taking the status ID S005, so whether it is, we have to update it. Now it is on Now it's not approved, so we have to update that it is approved. So for that we are using an update function called update, and we are setting the value to y, which is yes, for the status ID is 005, and now it is successfully updated. As you can see now, the approved status for the status ID S005 has changed from not approved to approved. So our second question is to list the average marks given for each project by the volunteers. To find the average from the feedback form, as we have 3 skills over here, we should add them and divide by. So we are listing out the volunteer ID and the average of the skill, and we're using the group by keyword to group the volunteer ID, and we're using the order by keyword to display it in an ascending order form. So as you all can see now, it is grouped, the volunteer ID is grouped, and the average of the skills are shown in an ascending order. Our next question is to display the projects happening in classroom 1. As you can see, there are lots of new classroom 1, classroom 2, lab 1 and hall 1. So we only want to display those projects happening in classroom 1. For listing out the projects happening in classroom 1, we are using a keyword called where, which is a condition keyword. And as you can see now, the projects listed below are only projects happening in the classroom. Our fourth question is to show the approval and completion of the project using the right join function. Right join function returns all the value from the right table and the matched records from the left table, and if there is no record in the left table, it will return as null. And now it is displaying the project ID from the project table and approved and completion status from the project status table. As we use the right join function, it is displaying the project ID from the project table and also the approved and completion status from the project status table. Our fourth question is to show the volunteer identification registered to the project using the self-join keyword. We are displaying out the volunteer ID from the volunteer A table as volunteer ID 1 and the volunteer ID from B table as volunteer ID 2 and the project ID. We are using the where keyword to compare if the volunteer ID from the volunteer A table and the volunteer ID from the B table are the same. Also we are using the AND keyword to check if the project ID from both the table from the volunteer A and volunteer B table are the same, and we are ordering it by the project ID. So let's run this, and as you all can see, it is ordered in an ascending order from the project ID, and it has taken the values from the volunteer A table and volunteer A table, and also is displaying the project ID.